Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of Arab Center Washington, I'd like to welcome you to this special webinar entitled Seeking an End to the GCC Crisis. Is a Solution Imminent? Essentially, the roots of the GCC crisis goes back to 2017. It's a crisis that is about 3.5 years old. As of today, and it emerged from differences between member states of the GCC, accusing the state of Qatar, a fellow member in the GCC, of certain charges like intervening in their own internal affairs and supporting radicalism in the region, charges that were not borne by the facts since the very beginning, but unfortunately they ended up resulting in at least a quartet of these countries, Saudi Arabia, namely Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, boycotting and laying siege in a way to the state of Qatar. And in spite of intervention by different parties, most kind of visibly the state of Kuwait from day one. They attempted to kind of find a peaceful solution to this unnecessary crisis. These efforts have not produced the intended results. The last few days we have seen some news about potential change in the attitude of the boycotting countries. Over the past few days, we've heard from Kuwait, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from the United Arab Emirates. Different officials representing these states have described the recent rather rigorous diplomatic activities in the Gulf region, seeking an end to this 2017 GCC crisis, using terminology we haven't heard for a while as being positive, promising, fruitful, and what have you. For example, Kuwaiti Foreign Minister Sheikh Ahmed Nasser Al-Sabah last Friday described these discussions or what's taking place as fruitful discussions that have taken place recently, in which all sides expressed their keenness to reach a final agreement to the Gulf crisis. The Qatari Foreign Minister himself, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, responded by stating on the same day, the 4th of December, that some positive movement is seen toward resolving the crisis. The Saudi Foreign Minister also, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, was quoted by the Washington Post the same day, last Friday, that an end to the years-long boycott of Qatar by the kingdom and 3 other Arab nations, quote, looks in reach, end of quote. Not to be left out, the Emirates surprisingly also responded positively. I say surprisingly because they have been kind of the most adamant about this conflict, but their ambassador here in Washington, Yusuf Al-Utaiba, acknowledged this week that there are a lot of commitments, as he put it, to kind of tone things down, to stand down, as he said, in the 3.5-year-old war of words with Qatar. And he expressed his own personal perspective that he thought that there is definitely progress, or at least there are seeds of progress, as he put it, in the pursuit of a solution. Is there seriously an attempt to resolve this problem? On what basis? What are the details? What seems to be the reason for delay? Would the expectation that the upcoming summit for the GCC would be the vehicle, if you will, to make the announcement later this month about a solution to this conflict? So there are many questions actually left unanswered, frankly, and to help us decipher this issue and to answer these and other questions, we have with us a special guest who is more than equipped to answer these questions. Dr. Majid Al-Ansari currently is president of Qatar International Academy for Security Studies. It's a professional consultancy or institute aimed at raising security standards knowledge and cooperation within the Gulf region and beyond. Majid has also been assistant professor of sociology at Qatar University, vice chairman of the Qatar Press Center, member of the board of the Strategic Studies Center at the Qatari Armed Forces. He has a PhD and a master's degree in social change from the University of Manchester, where he wrote his thesis on the topic of minority of citizens, the effects of religious, social, and political values on trust in expatriates in Qatar. Dr. Al-Ansari previously served at Qatar University, the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and various civil society institutions in various capacities. His research interests include public opinion surveys, social capital, political and religious values, charity work, and of course, current affairs. He has contributed, some of you recognize his name and his face, because he's been quite visible as a political analyst on various media outlets, including Al Jazeera, BBC Arabic, Russia Today, Al Arabi TV, Qatar TV. And in addition, he writes a weekly column for the Qatari daily Al-Sharq on authoritative issues impacting the Gulf. Dr. Al-Ansari will speak for about 15 minutes or so. He and I will engage in the art of conversation for a couple of minutes. Then we will open the floor, as always, to welcome your questions to our special guest. With that said, again, please send your questions via the Q&A format on the Zoom page. Otherwise, email him to the center, as always, and I'll be more than glad to pass on your questions during the Q&A session to our special guest. Dr. Majid, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Khalil, for this very kind and lengthy introduction to my very short history and tenure. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me, Khalil. Always happy to be with you virtually or in actuality. Last time I was honored to give a speech in the press center or the press club, sorry, in DC with your patronage, and I'm back here today virtually, and hopefully next time, as we turn the corner on COVID-19, we'll be able to meet in real life and discuss real issues.
Inshallah.
I will try to be brief, as most of you are probably more of experts in the Gulf crisis now than myself. This issue has been talked about countless times in countless seminars, symposiums, and conferences, and I think there is very little need to reiterate how this crisis began, how ridiculous it is, and how it went on with no end in sight for about 4 years now. However, I'd like to say a little bit about the developments that took place in the past couple of months and shed light a little bit on the differences between what is happening now and what happened at the end of 2019. So to begin with that, by the end of 2019, there was the first time a rapprochement in sight. At that time, it was the first instance where we heard that the Qatari foreign minister visited Riyadh, and that was done, of course, in a not so disclosed visit through a wave of meetings to try to find a solution between Riyadh and Doha. And that was the first instance where we started hearing about the fact that negotiations are taking place only between Riyadh and Doha and not with all the members of the quartet. And that actually developed into statements by the Qatari foreign minister and the Saudi foreign minister on the heels of the GCC Summit and the attendance of the Qatari Prime Minister, the highest delegation to attend in Riyadh since the beginning of the crisis. However, very surprisingly, and with the beginning of this very happy and joyous year, 2020, we saw all that disappear, and without explanation, it was found that the rapprochement that was promised did not materialize. While after that, we had only one statement saying that the Qatari side does not understand why talks broke down and that things were going well, but nothing materialized out of it, and that the Qatari side believes there is no reason to stop the talks, but they also were given no reason from the Saudi side. And the Saudi side did not comment on these comments or on how the negotiations were going. In the same surprising manner, towards the end of this year, we started hearing here and there about a last-minute American attempt to end this crisis before the end of Trump's tenure in the White House. And this began getting some attention post the elections, actually, in the US. We started hearing about these visits and people coming in and out and things happening on the ground. Nothing really materialized for a while, but in the past couple of weeks, there was talk that there was an agreement reached and that there is a document that's been agreed upon on how to start the dialogue, and that document entails three main things. Of course, these are still reports that are coming in the media and not information that's been provided by the government, so that we have some legitimate source from both sides of the conflict or from the mediator Kuwait. The report said that there are these 3 points. One, that the 13 demands are no longer on the table. Second is that the process will be that of finding common ground, not as the end of this crisis or a final resolution for this crisis, but finding a way towards the resolution. And therefore, there is no talk of a final resolution to the crisis. And the third thing is that the negotiations will be taking place between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and that Saudi Arabia will represent the remaining members of the quartet. And this is where the first problems began coming out. In a day, things moved very quickly, where news started breaking out that the Kuwaitis, and started breaking out as leaks first, and then as official news, that the Kuwaitis will make an announcement this night, and that the announcement will include the lifting of the air embargo, a partial lifting of the air embargo in Qatar, whereby Riyadh will allow Qatari planes to fly over Riyadh but not land, fly over Saudi Arabia, sorry, but not land in Saudi airports. And that it will also include the declaration by the Kuwaitis an end to the crisis and a beginning of talks between the parties. That statement by the Kuwaitis was delayed. We were promised that would be given by the afternoon and then the evening, and then we went to sleep with no statement coming out from the Kuwaitis. Morning came, things started becoming a bit clearer, and by evening on the second day, we had a very short, concise statement that said very little about what was accomplished, but praised very highly that was accomplished. The statement basically said that very major steps or very important steps were taken towards a resolution, and that the Kuwaitis congratulate the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and congratulate the people of the Gulf, and thank the US administration with a special mention to Jared Kushner, who was in the region a couple of days ago, and it seemed like his visit was the final nail in the coffin of this crisis. However, after that, the only thing we got was a statement, a very short statement by the Qataris, and a very short statement also by the Saudis praising the Kuwaiti mediator, but no information on any changes on the ground. Nothing was changed. The air embargo was not lifted. The borders are still remain closed. There is some de-escalation in Saudi media and in Qatari media towards Saudi Arabia, but there is absolutely no de-escalation from the Emirati and the Bahraini side. Counter to that, actually, what happened 2 days after the Kuwaiti statement is Manama started a new media offensive that took a very official form by announcing that they consider that there was Qatari aggression against Manama. There was an incident days back where through some military exercises in the Gulf. Bahraini small vessel found its way into Qatari waters and was captured by the Qataris, and the Qataris held them for a while and then released them back to the Bahraini side. And that was considered by the Bahrainis to be aggression against Bahrain. And if you flip through Bahraini newspapers the past couple of days, you'll find all these op-eds and headlines talking about Qatari aggression, which is a new word in the vocabulary of this crisis. Emirati media was also very keen to show that there is no change in the language towards Qatar. A documentary was put on Sky News Arabic, which is an Abu Dhabi linked TV channel that basically criticized the Emir himself and was considered very offensive by the Qataris. And it was aired one day after the statement by the Kuwaitis. And the Kuwaitis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, and the Egyptians stayed silent for a number of days. After that, they issued statements praising the agreement. The Emiratis and the Egyptians issued statements praising the Kuwaiti mediation, saying very little about it again. But it seemed like there was some confusion over the role of Saudi Arabia that nobody is willing to shed light on. So the statement by the Kuwaitis, the first statement by the Kuwaitis did not mention that Riyadh was representing the other country. The second statement by the Kuwaitis did, and the second statement by the Saudis did. And the Emiratis first began saying that no resolution to this crisis can be reached without the UAE, and then changed the narrative to say that Saudi Arabia represents UAE and that discussions have been had over the issue. Where are we right now? Well, we're in a very familiar position. We heard a lot of statements. We heard a lot of talk about resolution. And this comes very near to the GCC Summit, which today we started hearing news that it will be moved from Manama to Riyadh. The anticipation is that in Riyadh on the 5th of January, there will be a signing of an agreement between Qatar and the Quartet to end this crisis. Till now, we have no concrete news from either government, Saudi or Qatari, that this will take place. And there is no confirmation from the Qatari side who will attend this summit in Riyadh. It will be very problematic for His Highness the Emir of Qatar to attend it, as it is happening in Riyadh, and as that has, of course, not happened since the beginning. And the Saudi narrative was always that the solution is in Riyadh, meaning that Qatar has to come back to Riyadh and pay homage to the Saudi hegemony over the region. We are now waiting for news on that summit. Who will be attending from the Qatari side? What, if any, agreement will be signed over there? And are there any changes to the situation on the ground that will take place before? Obviously, we are not expecting that there will be any agreement signed in Riyadh unless the Saudis will take some steps on the ground towards Qatar to make sure that the Qatari condition that was put for beginning the talks back in 2017, which is the lifting of all or some of the sanctions that were put on Qatar, needs to happen before talks begin. And therefore, there will be a win-win situation where the Qataris can say, we lifted the sanctions before beginning to talk, and the Saudis can say, we brought the Qataris to Riyadh to sign the agreement. Still, we are waiting. We are very cautiously optimistic, probably me more than others, but we are waiting to see how things will materialize and if they will materialize, and we remain hopeful. So I think I can stop here, and Khalid, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Majid, for this detailed and frank analysis of the prospects for a solution to the Gulf crisis. You gave us a lot of meat for thought here, a lot of new details, and we appreciate that. Let me ask you, before we open up the floor to questions from the audience, you mentioned the issue of the 13 demands. Okay, earlier in this conflict, there were 13 demands. that were even described negatively by the then Secretary of State, who attempted early on to try to help mediate this conflict. I'm referring here to Rex Tillerson. He used terminology that they were not practical, they were not achievable goals, if you will, from early on. And now you basically said that the 13 demands are off the table, but they seem to have been replaced by 3 kind of objectives. What is the relationship between the 13 demands and the 3 objectives? Are the 3 objectives do they negate, if you will, the impracticality of the 13 demands, or are we still in the same boat?
Well, to be frank and blunt about this, it was, I think, very clear to all observers that the 13 demands were not actual demands. They were simply justification for the crisis that had no real justification in the beginning. We remember that the demands came 3 weeks after the beginning of the blockade. So after the 5th of June, 2017, by the end of June, we had the demands after much pressure from the US side to come up with real demands to the Qataris. The quartet came up with the demands. And if you look at the demands, the funny thing about them, and a lot of people don't realize this, demand, I think, number 12, if I'm not mistaken, is that all these demands are void if not complied with within 10 days. So technically speaking, these demands have been void since the 10th of July, 2017. And the funny thing is that they kept insisting that there are 13 demands even post that date, which kind of shows you how serious they were about the demands themselves. The demands were used as a vessel to justify the crisis, and I don't think they were real demands. I don't think anybody thought, including the Saudi and the UAE side, that there was any possibility of these demands materializing or becoming an issue for discussion, or even being used as, just to raise the bar in negotiations with Qatar. And then, of course, we had the 6 principles. They also had some tenure, and I remember that I think it's the Egyptian foreign minister who said that the 6 demands, the 6 principles, are a framework for the demands and do not replace them. And therefore, I think every time there is a rapprochement, we get to the same point. William Bennett, in his paper called The Political Scenarios, said that basically most political conflicts are built upon reasons that cannot be discussed. And therefore, you need to come up with these ways of justifying your crisis. And whenever there is a resolution, the resolution is creating an appearance of a resolution to conflict and not addressing the actual conflict. We all know that the actual conflict is about hegemony in the region. It's about political will and political influence in the region. And it is not really about the things that were discussed within the 13 demands. So I think any talk of any new demands or new framework for resolution is now, just as the 13 demands were used to justify the blockade on Qatar, there is a need now of a narrative to justify the resolution with Qatar. And therefore, I think we will be hearing a lot of this, these attempts to make sense of this to the people of the Gulf and to the international partners, why this problem ended, why it started. I think the narrative of 13 demands failed to make it more of a plausible conflict. Now, why it ends, while it doesn't need the same level of justification, it still needs some face-saving mechanism to make sure that it makes sense to their people and to partners abroad. I don't know if that answers the question, Khalid. I'm sorry.
It does. Thanks, Dr. Majid. In your remarks, you stated clearly that you were somewhat reserved, if you will, cautiously optimistic, as diplomats would put it, is what you said. Let me push you a little bit further on that. Would solving the issue of representation, like should Saudi Arabia convince the quartet to allow Riyadh to speak on their behalf, would that increase the seriousness of this occasion or this opportunity to solve the problem? Is it a matter of definitive representation, or is it beyond that?
Well, attempting to be as impartial as possible, I think there is a lot of question to be said on the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And this issue of representation, I think, entails a lot of, uh, a lot of questions about how representative is Saudi Arabia of the other members of the Quartet. Let's leave Bahrain and Egypt out of the question for the moment. We all know that Egypt's role in this crisis is quite minimal, and its entrenchment with the Saudis and the Emiratis more than having an actual stake in the crisis. And of course, a disagreement with Qatar over the Muslim Brotherhood and the support for the post-revolution forces in Egypt and post-revolution government in Egypt. And Manama, of course, I mean, I think it's safe to say that the foreign policy of Manama is outsourced to Riyadh, to put it in less diplomatic terms. And therefore, let's talk about the Saudi and the Emirati positions. I don't know if people notice this, but disagreements between Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis have been escalating in the past couple of months, and especially in the last month. I think the main disagreement took place in OPEC about a week before the declaration of talks between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, or the declaration of steps towards resolution between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. In OPEC, what happened basically is that Saudi Arabia needed a unified position under OPEC Plus agreement, and UAE right out said, we are not going to respect that deal, and talk started spreading about the possibility of UAE leaving OPEC, just as Qatar did a couple of years back. This level of escalation between the two countries have not been seen since 2008, when there was a disagreement over the UAE's ID cards that included maps of the UAE that included part of Saudi Arabia that was, well, according to the Emiratis, taken by the Saudis. And when there was another disagreement over the location of the GCC central bank, one of the dreams at the time that didn't materialize. And the other issue is that we heard some statements from Yemen, from pro-Saudi groups, asking the Emiratis to explain their position in Yemen, if I'm not mistaken. That was the terminology used, to explain their position, or to explain their targets, their goals, their objectives in Yemen, which kind of also showed that the long-awaited Saudi-Emirati dispute in Yemen might be closer to the media now and closer to an official and pronounced position. Now, there are two scenarios here. One is that Saudi Arabia decided to go at this alone and force the hand of UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt. And that looks more likely because the way that the Kuwaitis announced the end of the crisis was quite strange. It started with this very short and concise declaration by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then a letter was sent by His Highness the Emir of Kuwait congratulating the leaders on the end of the crisis and congratulating Saudi Arabia for its leadership and its representation of the other members. What kind of told you that it seems like there was another scenario that was supposed to happen and another declaration that was supposed to take place, and it didn't happen, but the protocol teams kind of forgot to change the other steps within the process, and things kind of went the way they were supposed to be in the beginning, without the juice that was supposed to be included in the statement. And also, if you look at how the Saudis, the pro-Saudis bloggers, the pro-Saudi influential figures that have been speaking in the past couple of days, there seems to be a bit of unease about the UAE's response to what happened. And there's a lot of attempts by pro-Saudi, these Twitter handles that we now know are managed by the Saudi royal palace. They're very keen to show that the Emiratis need to fall in line. We have been hearing language that I don't think we heard a lot in the past couple of years on the Emiratis. And I think that the declaration by the Emiratis signals that there was some sort of agreement that was taking place between the Emiratis and Saudis, finally, to make sure that this happens. Let's remember that when President Trump called for a summit back in 2017 with GCC leaders, it was UAE, not Saudi Arabia, that that stopped this in its tracks and refused to attend. And by the end of 2019, while the Saudis were talking about talks, the Emiratis had very harsh language about the possibility of a resolution with Qatar, and we saw a similar position right now. So I think it's safe to say that Saudis are taking a step further in this time, but that past experience kind of tells us that this could fall completely off the wagon anytime through the process. And if it did, probably it will be because of a hardline position by the UAE.
Okay, excellent. Let me convey this first question to you. We have several questions from staff and from the audience. First, considering the intensity of this conflict, beyond just official positions between the different countries involved in this crisis, what type of reconciliation from your perspective is still feasible after 3.5 years of intense conflict?
Okay, that's a loaded question.
It is.
So to answer that question, let me just begin by saying, what is the problem, right? I mean, in order to understand what resolution can be reached, we need to understand what the problem is. The problem on the ground is the disagreement over regional affairs, and especially that took place after the Arab Spring. And that was basically to say that Qatar, along with Turkey, supported the regimes that came out of the Arab Spring, the forces of change in the region, while UAE and Saudi Arabia in the beginning supported the regimes themselves and the post-revolutionary regime that came in as a counter-revolution, as it was called at the time. And then that escalated into a support for certain political groups. So Qatar supported basically any group that asked for democratization and change in the region. That included, but was not only, the Muslim Brotherhood and some political Islamist groups, and it also included liberal and leftist groups in Syria, in Libya, and in other locales. The sanctions imposed in Qatar, on Qatar in 2017 were three main things. One, there was a political boycott. So ambassadors were recalled, diplomatic missions were shut down, and no political relations, no diplomatic relations would take place after that, except for within the GCC. Second was an air and land embargo. Land, of course, we are landlocked only with Saudi Arabia. We have only one border with Saudi Arabia. And of course, our sea borders or our waters are open to regional waters, so we don't have a problem there. But of course, there's an air embargo from three sides. The Bahraini airspace kind of encapsulates Qatar because of I don't want to get into that issue, but and the UAE airspace is from the east, and Saudi airspace is all over the south. So we only have one place to go from there north to the Iranian airspace, and through the corridor that was established that gets us to Iraq, which is also under Iranian influence. So the resolution that will take place, I do not think it will be a political resolution. Meaning, I don't think the resolution will be around changing the position of Qatar towards the groups and the regional issues. Qatar will remain, for example, in support of the groups in North Syria, in support of the government in Libya, Al-Wifaq, the government in Libya. It will stay with its same position towards Iran, which is engaging Iran with acknowledging the differences with the Iranian regime's activities in the region. I don't think that will change. And from their side, of course, I don't think the Saudis and the Emiratis will check their positions in supporting the counter-revolutions and supporting combating the political Islamists and the liberals in the region that are asking for change. What will change, I think, is the procedures around it. So there is talk about media escalation. And I think this is a very important point. And it might seem ludicrous to people in other contexts. But even the talk of asking people on Twitter, so Qatari accounts on Twitter and Saudi accounts would cease hostilities, is a big thing in the GCC format today, regardless of how ridiculous it might sound. But this is an issue that's been discussed. It's an issue that's been raised, especially those accounts that are linked to government or to government officials or members of royal families and so on, the accounts that really make a difference. This will be an issue in discussion, but also, of course, official media and channels like Al Jazeera, Al Arabi from the Qatari side, Sky and Al Arabiya from the Saudi Emirati side. There will be de-escalation, I think, on these channels. You will see it, a change of language, a change of narrative, a more leveled approach without being too consolidating, let's say. So you will still see some criticism of each other, but probably this criticism will remain at the professional level and will not leave that side to become, the same warlike, narrative that was used in the past 3 years. The third issue is regarding how they are going to handle the economic side of this crisis. So opening the airspace is very important for Qatari economy. Right now, Qatar Airways is hemorrhaging funds because of its dependency on the Iranians and the Iranian airspace and its inability to fly to certain places because it cannot go from Qatar to Africa, for example, or all of the African lines have been disrupted, or most of them have been disrupted. So the airspace issue is very important. Landing in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and other cities is not a priority for Qatar at the moment, but using airspace of Saudi Arabia is a priority, which might also explain why the consensus is that we need to reach a resolution with Saudi Arabia and others not so much. It's the economic side of it. Saudi Arabia is the big economic hegemon next to Qatar. The other issue is from their side, the economy of UAE especially and of Saudi Arabia is hurting because of the oil prices and because of COVID-19 and because of the money they're spending in wars in Yemen and Libya and other places. This is not happening with Qatar nor Kuwait. They are at a better position to some extent, and especially Qatar is. If you look at the GDP numbers and if you look at the even the foreign investment numbers and so on, Qatar is in a much better place. And therefore, they would need that Qatar comes back in line to the GCC side in order for them to implement GCC-wide economic policies, which will include, but are not limited to, taxation on the populace. Now, taxation in the Gulf is a very big issue. These have been always called rentier states. By definition, these states are paying for the type of political system we have. And therefore, if you start taxing people, the classic question of taxation, no taxation without representation, will obviously come up, but not in Qatar. It will come up in Saudi Arabia. You have a population of about 30 million people. You have a lot of dissent within the country for various reasons. There are regional issues to be discussed, and the economic situation of the individual. The individual income is not as strong as other GCC states. So the questions will be raised there mostly. And they have already been raised because of some limited taxation and economic policies that took place in the past 2 years. If there is a resolution, I'm quite sure that one of the points of that is that Qatar be within the GCC framework of economic policies and not every country to establish its own policies to handle the crisis. So I'm sorry, I took a lot of time answering that question, but I think this is where we are at right now.
Thank you. No, that was important information, and I appreciate your sharing that with us. We have a question from Dr. Abdul Wahab Al-Qassab regarding Iran. Has Iran become a factor in these talks, and in what's the angle here?
Iran has always been an issue in the Gulf since the inception of GCC in 1981, and even before that, I remember there was a statement by Sheikh Khalifa, the grandfather of the current Emir in Qatar, when there were talks about 9-state union in the Gulf in the 60s, saying that Qatar joining that union might cause us issues in dealing with Iran. So I think there was always an issue about the strength of the relationships within the GCC countries or between the GCC countries and how that affects the relationship with Iran. I think the main role Iran played here is the role of instigator. I mean, Iran basically was very happy to find this crisis take place. The regime needed this fragmentation of the Gulf. We will remember that, as Khalid said in the introduction, that the GCC was founded upon the idea of facing this, the revolutionary tendencies of Iran and protecting this side of the Gulf from Iranian incursions. However, in the past year, what we saw was that the Americans kind of changed tactic to using Iran as the main justification for pressuring Saudi Arabia and the UAE to end this crisis. You guys need to end the air embargo in Qatar because they are paying the Iranians for their airspace. We cannot make the Qataris stop doing that because you're blocking their way from the other side. So that was the narrative that was delivered by the Americans since the end of 2019 until today. And I think that was the main role that Iran played. The Iranians, after the declaration, came up actually with a positive statement, but I'm quite sure that from the Iranian side, they will do whatever is needed, or at least seize any opportunity that comes up to make sure that the positions in the Gulf stay as they are. And I think they understand that even if there was a resolution today, or an appearance of a resolution, as Bennett said, that will be short-lived and can be easily manipulated through events and conflicts that will happen in the region. And Iran is expecting, of course, now that it's going to have its second honeymoon with Biden, a return to Obama era foreign policy. I'm sure they would like the election to present an even more moderate president to deal with the Iranians. The language has already changed in Iranian media and by Iranian officials, and that will affect the way they look at the Gulf crisis, because now it's even more important for them to be able to isolate Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar as countries with somewhat positive relationships with Iran, or let's just say normalized relations with Iran, as opposed to Saudi Arabia. The point here is UAE. UAE has always been an odd duck in dealing with Iran. So it's not a secret that the main financial breathing zone for Iran is the UAE. When it comes to the economic scale, the country that has the most commerce exchange with Iran in the region by far is UAE. And even in the beginning of 2020, the UAE started sending security delegations to Iran to convey that their position towards Iran is dictated by Saudi Arabia and that they are willing to play ball with the Iranians. We've seen, for example, when Fakhrizadeh was assassinated, the Emiratis were very quick to the draw to show their disagreement with what happened, and that they will not support the Iranians, but at least that they find themselves in a position closer to the Iranians. I think it's very important to understand that the UAE doesn't really have a problem with the Iranians. It has a problem with the regional setup. Whenever Iran is part of that problem within the regional setup, then the UAE has a problem with Iran. But this is the exact position of Qatar. Qatar doesn't have a real problem with Iran. And Qatar and UAE will never, actually UAE, there are three islands that are disputed between UAE and Iran. But at least since the revolution till now, there hasn't been any military problems between UAE and Iran. And the same thing goes for Qatar. For the Kuwaitis, for example, there was an assassination attempt. The Iranians attempted to assassinate the Kuwaiti Emir. For the Saudis, a myriad of issues. But for Qatar and UAE, they're in a similar position. Qatar also, when it was supporting the revolution in Syria, was acting against the Iranians and was very clear that to Qatari foreign policy that it is against Iran in that issue. The same thing on opposite side goes for UAE. They're only against Iran when Iran supports Hamas, when Iran supports non-UAE agenda political groupings, but not when Iran is being Iran. And this is why they were able to coordinate with the Iranians in Syria, in southern Syria, for example. They were ordered to, they did some kind of work with the Iranians in Iraq before 2017. So I think it's very important to understand that the UAE's position here is not similar to the Saudi position, which is hegemon to hegemon. It is basically a position of, we have economic relationship with Iran, we can work with the Iranians, but right now we need the Saudis much more, and we have a regional plan for it.
Excellent. We have another question, somewhat related to what you just answered, but it focuses on an issue that you did not touch on, which is the American role, the recent Kushner visit to the region. Was it totally focused on an attempt to try to deprive Iran from the income of those flights that you referred to over Iran, the 100 million or so that Qatari airline pays, or was it beyond that?
Obviously, I was not privy to what happened in these meetings, and by no means do I represent the government of my country or any other government to understand what happened in these talks by detail. But I have three questions about the Kushner visit to the region. The first is, why would the governments in the region, and especially Saudi Arabia, be so willing to deal with Kushner, knowing that he's, at the time, it was like 50 days until he's out of office, and his father-in-law is out of office, of course, as well. Well, you know, at least one hopes. But that's the first question. The second question is, why would Kushner come to the region to talk about the GCC crisis so late in the game? If you weren't able to do this when you could have capitalized on it, why do it now? The third question is, how does this help Kushner and the Trump administration in the future, in the very short future they have in the White House or any other future? To be honest, I don't have any real answers to these questions, but one can assume two things. One is that for the Saudis, it's important for them to diffuse some of the regional files before Biden comes into office. And Kushner was a vessel to do that. You are dealing with a US official. You are dealing with somebody who is willing to play ball on things that probably people from the Biden administration will not be willing to do so. And therefore, it's better to at least diffuse one of these issues, the GCC issue, before Biden comes into play, because it's the easier of the three main issues. You can't put Khashoggi, rahimahullah, bring him back from the dead and present him to the Americans. You cannot pull out of Yemen in a day or two, but you can reach a settlement with Qatar in a fairly short time. The other issue is that I think when Kushner was here in the region, he had two main tasks. One was to get an accomplishment for himself before he left office, and to kind of get some momentum for a post-Trump era political career, which I don't know how realistic that is, to be honest. But also to talk about the Iranian issue with all parties. The possibility of doing something with Iran before, before the administration leaves. I'm quite sure that there was no talk of strikes on Iran or a war on Iran, but something to be done to sabotage Biden's plans to get back the JCPOA.
Excellent. Iran, Dr. Ansari, is not the only regional player involved in a way in this crisis. Turkey is another case. Should there be a reconciliation between Qatar and the quartet and an end to the siege or boycott and so on, how would that impact Turkey's role in the Gulf region?
I think Qatar made it very clear from the beginning that it talk about its relation with Turkey is not on the table and will never be on the table. You have to remember that from the Qatari perspective, if it wasn't for Turkey's support in 2017, the American support was nowhere to be found for a while, especially on the political side.
Yes.
And if you didn't have a regional player like Turkey to kind of, balance with Saudi Arabia, then there would be serious issues in Qatar's ability to deal with the crisis, especially in the first couple of days or the first couple of weeks of this crisis. Plus, the relationship with Qatar and Turkey has grown exponentially in the last 10 years, but especially in the last 4. Now it's reaching a level of almost complete synergy over regional issues, economy, military cooperation, and a lot of other issues in the region and beyond. Therefore, I do not find it possible that the Qataris would be willing to change their position towards Turkey, especially that I don't think, from a Qatari perspective, reconciliation with Saudi Arabia is that beneficial to Qatar. At the moment, I think Qatar has managed to withstand the effect of the blockade for 4 years, has managed to find, markets to replace Saudi markets, find suppliers to replace Saudi suppliers. The process has went beyond Saudi Arabia. As one of the Qatari officials said in the beginning of the crisis, we have simply been transformed from a peninsula to an island. Therefore, I don't think there is a lot of appetite for a resolution by Qatar that would entail changing the position towards Turkey, towards any regional issue. I think for the Qatari side, any costly concession to be given to the Saudis is not within question at the moment. And this is why I think it will be mainly around media de-escalation, some political pampering to the Saudis, and some cosmetic agreements on political issues.
Thank you. We have another question pertaining to both official positions, and also many analysts here in Washington have referred to the possibility of a gradual process of reconciliation. I think the word is a process of deconflicting was mentioned the last couple of days, including by the UAE ambassador here in Washington. So the question is that a risky process, going into gradualism to deal with a crisis of this sort? Is that the only way to facilitate eventual reconciliation down the road? Or do we have to tackle the main issues?
Well, I think there's a general consensus that the main issues here are not reconcilable in the current climate. No party is under real pressure to end this crisis and change their positions to end this crisis. And this is, as has been said by some observers, it's a very prosperous crisis. No people dying on the ground. No economy is really hurting because of the crisis. No military escalation between the parties, and therefore there is little appetite to end the crisis by all sides, not only the Qatari side. However, because of these small issues that each party needs, airspace for Qatar, economic policies on the Saudi side, an appearance of a solution for the sake of the Biden administration, both parties, I think, are willing to talk about a resolution. And this is where my very cautious optimism comes into play. I really believe that the decision to end the crisis has not been taken yet. I think both parties would like to seem like they're doing the right thing. They're talking about it, that they can make use of that middle ground of talking about a resolution but still being in conflict, to do a lot of things together that they need to do, both parties need to do, without actually having to negate on all the narrative, and the negative publicity and so on that was done through the crisis, and giving both parties now having an opportunity to end this process of reconciliation at any point. So no real commitment, but at least you have an appearance that both parties are doing great. I think the Qatari position was always that we need to show the world that we are for peace and for dealing with our neighbors, and that we are willing to do anything to make sure that this persona, this positive persona of Qatar, is the one that the West sees, because this crisis and the efforts of lobbyists on behalf of UAE and Saudi Arabia managed in a lot of contexts to badmouth Qatar and show Qatar as a radical force in the region, and sowing discontent in the Arab world. And therefore, it was important for Qatar to show itself like that. For the Saudi and Emirati side, they don't want the pressure from Biden's side. They want to be able to say, as soon as the cavalry comes in and start talking about, you need to make a resolution with Qatar and pull out of Yemen, and you need to answer for Khashoggi's murder. They want to be able to say, listen, about Qatar, we started talking with the guys. So at least to kind of diffuse that issue.
We have two more questions. We will divide 2 minutes each with our remaining time. One pertaining to the mediation. Kuwait certainly played a key role, as we all know, in trying to mediate this conflict by the previous Emir, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad, which was also endorsed by the current Emir, Sheikh Nawaf. Yet we have this intrusion now by Kushner and the US trying to add a little pressure to this. Does the credit for a potential solution still go to Qatar? To Kuwait, sorry.
Well, I think it goes to Kuwait, and it goes especially for the previous Amir, may he rest in peace. I mean, especially in Qatar, we have a special fondness of the late Amir. We believe wholeheartedly that he managed to de-escalate this crisis from an invasion of Qatar to being the crisis that it is now. We do believe that he sacrificed a lot. And I don't think people understand this. He sacrificed a lot personally on his health. He was extremely ill when he made the shuttle trips between Doha, Riyadh, and UAE. And to be honest, he was met with various insults in these meetings from the other side. And I think that was a time that was not, he should have gathered more respect. He's the eldest within the rulers in the region, and he has a history unparalleled by any leader in the GCC. Also, the Kuwait managed to do a very important thing, which is safeguard the GCC. And people don't understand how important that is. It was very easy without Kuwait to have the GCC halted altogether, or to have Qatar being kicked out along with Oman and Kuwait, and for the GCC to become the small club of UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. Kuwait, by its presidency of the GCC that year, managed to hold the summit, to bring at least partially the leaders together, to make sure that the process was ongoing, that the mechanisms of the GCC were ongoing. So I think this is the main role they played. And now all this effort they are doing certainly is helpful. However, we all understand that without real pressure from the superpower, the US, the Saudis and the Emiratis will not change their position towards Qatar. And nobody has a real incentive to do so without pressure from the Americans. That was very useful for Kuwait and the role of Kuwait, the role that Kuwait played in this.
Thank you, Dr. Majid. Let's end on a lighter note. We have one question pertaining to soccer. Should this crisis be resolved, how would that impact the World Cup? Will we see a Saudi team participating now with less constraints than anticipated in the past? How about the thousands of Saudi nationals who would like to attend that? Are we going to see them in Doha?
Okay, so with my extreme lack of knowledge on sports altogether, I will try to answer this from a political perspective. So the first thing is that Saudi teams are already playing in Qatar in various tournaments. So in the past couple of years, we've seen Saudi, Emirati, and Bahraini teams come to Qatar, play games very successfully, and go back. And we've seen the opposite with Qatari teams attending in Riyadh and in Abu Dhabi. And therefore, that is not an issue in itself. And delegations between the countries have been going back and forth, but in a very limited GCC-related or sports-related issues, but not, as a bilateral relationship between Qatar and these countries. From the other side, the plan for the World Cup depended a lot on Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and UAE. At the time, for example, fan zones were designated in Dubai. And there would have been a shuttle between Dubai and Doha, whereby people can come in the morning. I think it was like $50 flights to Doha, watch the games, and go back and party all night in Dubai and Manama. Of course, that plan dissipated with 2017. I do not think that this can be changed, but the idea of having people come in, I don't think we should underestimate how much people in our region like soccer, and what especially Saudi soccer fans are willing to do to watch soccer. Just to give you an example, Qatari sports media is most watched till this day by Saudis in the region. So you have Al-Kas channel and BN Sports. The most watched regions you can find for them is within Saudi Arabia. So I think, yes, if there was an opening of the border, I think you'd see thousands of Saudi fans flocking together for the World Cup.
Thank you, Dr. Majid. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate you taking time off your very busy schedule to be with us today. This was a very, very exciting and informative program, and we appreciate again your willingness to be with us, to be our guest today. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. Appreciate your questions and your participation, and we look forward to hosting you again in future programs. Please be safe. Thank you.